All right, welcome to another RotoDen NBA podcast. I'm Blaine Robinson along with John Ryan once again. It's about 5 minutes to midnight Eastern time, and free agency news is rolling in, and it's just going to pick up after midnight. So we're going to get into that, but first we're going to start with the Paul George trade, the breaking news from just less than a couple hours ago. John, we have you standing by. What was your initial reaction to the Paul George to Oklahoma City trade? It's not a destination we had really heard about.
First look, it looks like it's worth the risk for Oklahoma City, partially because there isn't much risk involved. They take on less money in the trade. They actually shed salary by taking on Paul George. Both Paul George and Russell Westbrook are free agents next year. So that could be dangerous if things don't work out. But in order to keep Russell Westbrook, you want to give him a winning culture, and Paul George could provide that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my first impression was it definitely was shock, but secondarily it's still kind of confusing because I don't really know that it takes them up to that next tier in the West. I mean, you still have Golden State, obviously, San Antonio, obviously, and then, Houston just acquired Chris Paul. They're still right there. I don't know that Westbrook and Paul George necessarily takes them to that next level, but I did hear one interesting thing, which was Oklahoma City could possibly get more for Paul George if they move him at the deadline than Indiana just got for him in the offseason, which is pretty striking because we had heard that Indiana got some pretty good offers on the table, but they settled for an offer of Oladipo and Sabonis with no picks. Was that kind of strange to you as well?
Yeah, I thought that was not enough to land Paul George, especially with so many teams seemingly interested in him. One trade that I saw reported by Jeff Goodman said that the Celtics on draft night offered multiple first-round picks plus Crowder and another player. And that, if true, is far and away a better offer than what they just got.
Yeah, I agree. Go ahead.
Yeah, if they're turning offers down like that and took this, then I don't understand.
I think that's where the politics of front offices and GMs really comes into play, because it seemed like the ultimate petty move. I mean, we've heard of, not just the one you just mentioned with Boston, who is armed with a lot of first-round picks, but we've heard numerous other trade proposals for Paul George, including Kevin Love and things of that nature, that were probably a lot better than Oladipo, Sabonis, and no picks. So to me, it just sort of reeks of politics in front offices, and maybe there's a long-standing relationship there with Pacers GM Kevin Pritchard and the Oklahoma City front office led by Sam Presti. That's just speculation on my part, but I mean that's almost what it has to be from my vantage point.
Yeah, it's a head-scratching move. I think the Thunder are clearly winners in it. The Pacers did have to trade Paul George, but to do it with an offer like that, I don't really understand it.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about that. So it's just really it's testament to the Sam Presti wizardry. He always does this, and you never hear it coming. There's a lot of trades that happen, and after a lot of rumblings and a lot of rumors and a lot of reports, they come true. But you never hear a peep out of Oklahoma City. When they did the James Harden trade a few years back, which isn't fond memories for a lot of Thunder fans, nobody knew it was coming. Nobody knew it was coming, and then boom, they traded him to Houston, and then more recently, the trade that acquired Oladipo on draft night last year, they shipped out Serge Ibaka and got Sabonis and Oladipo, and we didn't hear anything about that. That was sort of quiet, and that came out. And then this, we had heard the Cavs were looking at George. We heard Boston. We heard Houston recently. We even heard Phoenix, but you never heard Oklahoma City, and then boom, it flashes across your screen that Paul George is going to Oklahoma City, and it was kind of a shocker, really.
Yeah, they always seem to be quiet, and they have a good front office. They've made good moves to build that team to what it was, and I guess they're trying to get it back there. Rumors already swirling in as we approach midnight that they're looking to be aggressive in free agency. They're going to meet with Zach Randolph later this week, or actually early this week. And I could see them trying to get in on a few big names just to get them back in the mix.
Yeah, piggybacking off that, I would watch out, and I don't have any inside information on this one, but I would watch out for Paul Millsap. I think with the fact, and we're going to get into this in a second, the fact that Blake Griffin has re-signed with the Clippers with a 5-year max, I think there was a lot of people saying that they thought Blake Griffin would go home to Oklahoma City. I never really bought into that because, as you and I have talked about before, the Thunder have to have floor spacers. They have to have guys with the reliable jump shots out to the three-point line to create more room and space for Russell Westbrook and now for Paul George. And I think Paul Millsap is the ultimate versatile guy. He's a better rebounder and better defender than Blake Griffin for one, but on the offensive end, he's way more versatile. I mean, he can bang down low. He's got a great three-point shot. He's got a good mid-range game. And he's just always going to do the dirty work and do whatever it takes, and he can fit into any system. So I would say watch out definitely for something on the Paul Millsap front. And I guess as a side note, the only way that can happen is if they move the contract of Enes Kanter. But that's something you've got to be willing to do because we've seen him get played off the floor in numerous playoff series because he can't defend the pick and roll.
Definitely agree on that. I think Millsap should definitely be looked at as maybe the favorite to go to Oklahoma City. That's a great fit. Just piggybacking with everything that you just mentioned there. You can spread the floor, be a shooter in the corner when Westbrook is kicking out and driving. Good rebounder, good defender. He just kind of offers everything that they were missing down low after trading Ibaka. Like you said, Kanter, liability on the defensive end and found himself on the bench during the playoffs. So yeah, I think Westbrook, Paul George, Paul Millsap, that won't get you by the Warriors by any means, but that gets them back into the mix for a deep playoff run.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And I think there's incentives all the way around on a deal like that because Atlanta can surely get something out of it, like Kanter and another complimentary piece, whereas the alternative is they lose him for nothing because he is an unrestricted free agent. The incentive for Millsap is if he does a sign and trade, he can get the full 5-year max, and then Oklahoma City has a contract that they can move later. Like we just saw, they signed Oladipo to the huge max. He hasn't even been with the team for one full calendar year, and he's been moved. So I think there could be incentive all the way around to do a sign and trade between Atlanta and Oklahoma City, but that's all speculation at this point, stemming from the fact that we both think they're going to be pretty aggressive tonight and moving forward in free agency. So let's move on real quickly to some of the other what we thought were the big sort of notable headlines from today until the Paul George news. We've got Rubio going to the Utah Jazz from the Timberwolves for a first-round pick in 2018. We have Jeff Teague reportedly going to sign with Minnesota in free agency to be Rubio's replacement. And then we have, as I mentioned, alluded to a second ago, Blake Griffin, somewhat surprisingly, staying in Los Angeles with the Clippers. So start with the Rubio trade, going to Utah for a 2018 first-round pick. What are your thoughts on that one?
They seem pretty set on trading Rubio, and I think getting a first-round pick for him is solid value. Though they got no players, this pretty much opens up the cap space to sign a point guard, and all signs are pointing to that point guard being Jeff Teague. Multiple sources are saying that he's basically a lock there. He canceled meetings with a few teams, with those teams thinking that he's already pretty much going to the Timberwolves. I mean, nothing is confirmed yet, but it seems that Teague will likely be there, and if not, Lowry can still be a player there. But it seems like that trade was strictly just to make room for a new point guard.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing to me quickly is, like you mentioned, everyone knew, it was no big secret. Everyone knew that Minnesota was looking to get rid of Rubio. He was a solid player for them, but I just think with the direction they've sort of gone this offseason with the acquisition of Jimmy Butler, they need a different type of a point guard who can be a little bit more efficient offensively. So the surprising thing to me was that they got a first-round pick in next year's draft, and not only that, if Gordon Hayward does indeed leave the Jazz, that could be a decent pick. The West is loaded, and I think if Hayward leaves, it's not unreasonable to think that the Jazz could easily miss the playoffs, and then the Timberwolves, who are trending in all the right directions, have a lottery pick in next year's draft.
Yeah, to my knowledge, there was no protection on that pick, right?
That's correct. I saw no protection on that pick, and Utah will be decent, but I think in this loaded, stacked Western Conference, it's not unreasonable that if they lose Gordon Hayward, they're going to lose a lot of games next year. So that's something to look forward to, seeing how that plays out. But Minnesota could definitely win that because they were looking to get rid of Rubio either way. And then the Blake Griffin news. What did you think about him staying with the Clippers? There had been a lot of rumblings that he was going to take meetings, do visits, maybe the Suns, maybe the Thunder. A lot of stuff going on like that. And then suddenly, it was reported that he's agreeing to sign a 5-year maximum deal with the Clippers.
I wasn't too surprised. Once CP3 was traded, all signs kind of pointed to Griffin staying. Reports said, off the top of my mind, I don't remember who was reporting it, but reports said that CP3 and Blake had some tension and that one or the other didn't want to play with each other anymore, so either one or the other would leave the Clippers. And just for Blake, he didn't have many options to go win now. He was obviously considering, the rumors said that he was considering meetings with the Celtics, the Thunder, like we said. But even that doesn't put him into a real championship situation. So, he's going and getting that money. 173, 5 years. Stay in LA. It's hard to pass up.
Yeah, especially with his, that's a great point, staying in LA, especially with his endorsements with numerous different companies. It's a great place to be in LA, and like you said, who's going to turn down 5 years at over $170 million? And speaking of that, one other signing for a max deal of a superstar is John Wall. Reportedly is going to sign a 4-year extension worth up to $168 million to stay with the Wizards. So if you're a DC fan, I think you're pretty happy that you keep your cornerstone guy for this year plus 4 more years.
Yeah, it's definitely a win-win for both sides.
Quickly, signings are flying off the wall right now. Very shocking to me. Don't know if you've seen this yet, but Adrian Wojnarowski is reporting that the Spurs and Patty Mills have agreed to a 4-year, $50 million deal to remain in San Antonio. And it sounded like, from everything I've heard since the season ended, it sounded like the Spurs were going to try to save some money, get their young guards to develop, and then let Patty Mills walk in free agency. We both know they drafted Derek White out of the University of Colorado last week in the draft. So that's quite the price tag. 4 years, $50 million for probably a bench role. He'll probably stay in a bench role. What do you think about that signing?
Yeah, I'm surprised with that. It's roughly $12 million a year. I think it's a good fit. He's been great in San Antonio. He's still relatively young. DeJounte Murray wouldn't be quite ready to shoulder a starting role, and Tony Parker, healthy or not, I don't know if he can continue to start for that team. So having him stay, I think that's a good move for the Spurs. For that price, it's a little pricey, especially for a team that's cash strapped. Considering trading LaMarcus Aldridge to free some of that. But yeah, I think it's a good fit for both sides. I would have liked to see him in New Orleans. I thought he would have been a great fit with the Pelicans in that roster, but he'll be back in San Antonio.
Yeah, and San Antonio, they know what they're doing, so who am I to question them? They've had the most successful franchise probably in sports outside of the New England Patriots over the last 2 decades, so I'm sure they know what they're doing, and it'll be a familiar face for Spurs fans to see Patty Mills still in uniform in San Antonio. Another signing really quickly, we reported this probably was going to happen. Adrian Wojnarowski is also reporting that Jeff Teague has agreed to sign a 3-year, $57 million deal with the Timberwolves. And as we mentioned to start this podcast, it was pretty much a foregone conclusion once he canceled other meetings and verbally committed to stay or to go to Minnesota.
Yep, that seems to complete the Timberwolves mini rebuild to get them into the playoffs. Teague, Butler, Wiggins, Cat, Deng, they seem to be pretty loaded.
One thing I will say about that is, we talked about this before with the Chris Paul fit and how I didn't like Kyle Lowry because he's more of a score first point guard. But it does surprise me. I don't think of Jeff Teague as a guy who gets all of his teammates in the right spot and elevates their play. I don't really see him as that type of floor general. I see him more as, he's an unselfish guy, but I see him more as an offensive guy who looks to get his own shot and doesn't really have the sort of command of an offense that allows everybody else's play to elevate. And that's what I was looking for Minnesota to do. I thought with a clear number 1, 2, and 3 options with Butler, Towns, and Wiggins, that they would go after a pure pass first point guard like Chris Paul or Rajon Rondo was released today by the Bulls. I thought a couple guys in that mold would have fit better, but it'll be interesting to see. I don't know how you like Teague in Minnesota, but to me he doesn't quite strike me as that guy.
I think they're going to use Jimmy Butler in that decision role. I think he's going to be shouldering a lot of the point guard like duties. He'll bring the ball up. He'll make the plays. He'll be the playmaker for that team. So I think it was important to surround him with more shooters. And Jeff Teague's a good shooter. Definitely an upgrade over Rubio.
No question.
I didn't like what Teague did in Indiana, but I think that's just because he was more of a second option. I think being a third or fourth option with this mini team, I think that'll be good for him. I think he'll get back on track. I think it'll be a good fit.
Good. It's an interesting take. I like that you sort of brought to light the fact that he was probably in a more elevated role as a second option than he probably needs to be on a good team. So it's definitely a great point by you. Other news: the Bucks have agreed to retain the services of Tony Snell for 4 years, $46 million. I believe he was a restricted free agent, so it's very important that they got on that and signed their guy before a crazier offer sheet was given to Tony Snell. So that keeps a starter on an up and coming Milwaukee team in the fold. So what do you think about that?
It was a good move. Important player, good defender. So it'll keep that Bucks team on the rise.
Yeah, and I think we often forget after watching them go to 7 games with Toronto in the first round that they basically get Jabari Parker back, and although they had Chris Middleton for the last 20 or so games plus the playoffs, they are going to go into an offseason with hopefully I understand Jabari Parker's still rehabbing, but hopefully they go into training camp, sorry, not the offseason, with Middleton, Snell, Antetokounmpo, and Parker all getting used to playing with one another, all, getting their chemistry down, because we really haven't seen them at full strength with this core.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see. It's a lot of wing depth, and that's going to be the one way you get by LeBron if you're going to be able to. Snell is the perfect guy for that. Great defender. He's strong, big body. And being able to have that depth there, you can throw him in without having to worry about foul trouble if Giannis is there. Because Snell can just step in and be that guy to guard him for a few minutes at a time.
Yeah, and they've got a lot of versatility on the defensive end. You look at Giannis Antetokounmpo can pretty much guard. You probably don't want him chasing around a speedy point guard, but if he had to, he can guard anybody on the floor. And then you look at Snell. Brogdon's even a decent defender. Dellavedova's not the biggest guy in the world, but he clearly will put up a fight and is one of the most pesky defenders in the league. So, they've got a lot of options, and it's going to be interesting to see their development and how much of a step they can take after really having a good year but not advancing in the playoffs. Another deal that's coming across via Chris Haynes of ESPN, which is great news for Warriors fans. Sean Livingston has agreed to re-sign at 3 years, $24 million. I know Sean Livingston and Andre Iguodala were sort of, right on the fence as to whether or not Golden State could retain their services. So do you like that they sort of keep their core intact by keeping Livingston as their backup point guard?
Yeah, I love Livingston with the Warriors. He's been in a great role with them the past few years, and it's been really nice to see his career kind of be revived with this team in that sort of bench role. He's played crucial minutes in crunch time. He's helped shoulder the load with Curry off the floor before Durant got there, and it's good for both sides to have him back.
And speaking of Curry, it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that this would be the end result, but it's now official that Curry will sign that Supermax extension, 5 years, just under $202 million to remain with the Warriors, which makes him, for now, the highest paid player in NBA history. And, it's well deserved because Curry played the last 4 years on that bargain of a contract at 4 years, $44 million, had 2 MVPs, 2 championships, and was on one of the most team-friendly contracts in the history of sports. So I don't think there's a real surprise there that he gets the Supermax at over $200 million over 5 years.
Yeah, you said it. Definitely well deserved. Good for him to get that money. But that'll definitely shake things up there down the line, maybe 2 or 3 years. They might have to pick between Draymond and Clay.
It definitely could come down to that because, they have deep pockets, and I'm sure they have been making a great profit with the success they've had. But, it always comes a breaking point where it might not be fiscally responsible to keep all 4 of them when you have all that money on the books. We've noticed a theme, or I'm sure that the listeners have noticed a theme, that we've been doing a lot of talking about the Western Conference. It's been stacked, it's been loaded, it's been the superior conference for years now. But with some of these moves, with Paul George going to the Thunder, the Warriors retaining their guys, the Houston Rockets now, Jimmy Butler going from the East to the West to the Timberwolves, which ironically, it's not really any more West than Chicago was, but Western Conference when I say Jimmy Butler goes west to the Timberwolves. But it's just amazing how deep the Western Conference is. ESPN put out a little fun fact that 13 of their top 14 players in their NBA rank now reside in the Western Conference. Where do you sort of see the pecking order with all these teams right now? Speaking of Minnesota, Houston now with the Chris Paul news, Oklahoma City with the Paul George news. Golden State's still on top. San Antonio hasn't really made any splashy moves yet, but I'm sure you have them right at the top still. What's sort of your pecking order with all this Western Conference dominance?
Yeah, it's interesting to seeing that the East had finally been catching up the past couple years in terms of talent, and now it just seems that it's becoming thinner once again. In regard to the pecking order, obviously the Warriors still are at 1. You'd have to put the Spurs in the top 2 or 3 just based off their consistency, getting 60 wins and deep playoff runs in the past 15 years. Obviously the Rockets, after that CP3 trade, we'll get to this later, but I'm not actually a huge fan of the trade for them. But yeah, we'll get to that later.
Well, we can talk about it right now while we're on the subject, because I tend to agree with you, but why don't you go ahead and speak on your vantage point, what that looks like, and why you're not a huge fan of Chris Paul in Houston.
Yeah, I guess the first reason, when I first saw that trade, obviously I was shocked. No one, there was thoughts that CP3 could possibly go to the Rockets, but it wasn't really a favorite or anything for him to end up there. So obviously it was shock, but second, I just saw it. Everything that the Rockets were giving up for him, they gave up a lot of their bench, a lot of good players, including Beverly, who more or less made up for Harden's lack of defense on that side of the ball. And Harden really thrived last year being moved to point guard. He showed that being the ball-dominant player and the decision-maker, that's where he was his best. And now he's getting a ball-dominant point guard to move him back to his previous role. So it's kind of like you finally took that next step, and now you're just giving him a player that's going to set him back again. So I didn't really understand that at all. I thought they gave up way too much. I think it's ultimately going to make them a worse team this year. I'd expect them to have a worse record, and I could even see them losing in the first round.
Interesting you say that, because those were pretty much all of my initial thoughts. And I've sort of backed off those thoughts a little bit, but for the most part, those were exactly my words. I mean, James Harden just came off the best year of his career, playing point guard, having the ball in his hands, and being the primary decision maker. Chris Paul is exactly that same type of player. He's a player who's best with the ball in his hands and best as the primary decision maker. Neither of them are really what you would call superior off-ball offensive weapons. They're not going to be mistaken for Klay Thompson or Reggie Miller or Rip Hamilton as just being very successful moving without the ball and getting their offense without the ball in their hands. Both guys are guys who rely on having the ball in their hands. And the other interesting thing is that Chris Paul is usually, or I mean, not usually, I mean, history suggests that he is good at making his bigs better. We had the Clippers moniker Lob City. Even before that in New Orleans, he had bigs like David West and Tyson Chandler, and he can always make somebody who's not quite as offensively gifted a better offensive player because of his ability to command an entire offense and sort of be that quarterback on the floor. But I don't think James Harden needs that. I don't think that Harden is a player who is going to get any better because Chris Paul is there. I really can't see Chris Paul getting Harden any more efficient or better statistics than he had this past year. And like you said, I think that's going to result in a worse record for the Rockets. It was kind of perfect. It was kind of the perfect storm where Harden had the ball in his hands and he either got to the rim or found an open three-point shooter, and that was sort of the Rockets' offense. But the reason that I am a little reluctant to be all the way negative is because the rumors are that Harden and Chris Paul talked and they wanted to do this. And when you got two guys who want to make this work and talked about it beforehand, I think you got to let it play out. And they're two very smart guys, high basketball IQ, very cerebral players. So I think it's a little bit of a different scenario, the fact that they talked about it and joined forces rather than Chris Paul being traded to Houston without Harden's knowledge.
Yeah, that's a good sign. I'm sure they've played together previously in Olympics, or just in general, but it'll just be interesting to see Chris Paul, like as you said, he utilizes his bigs first and foremost. He really thrives as a pick-and-roll ball handler, and I can't really see James Harden just becoming a spot-up shooter. It'll be interesting to see how they kind of balance each other out. I can't imagine Harden just taking a back seat to him as the primary ball handler. I think it'll be kind of a 50-50. Like you said, there was a stat that I saw. I believe Harden was second last in the NBA in the percentage of his shots that were considered open shots.
Yeah, I believe he was actually the lowest. He had the lowest percentage of open shots in the NBA.
Yeah, so adding a guy like CP3 could definitely get you more open shots, and that certainly will help him. But it'll just be interesting to see, with that, getting him open shots, how many of those shots he also is no longer taking in general.
Yeah, it's a good point. The volume will go down, and in many cases that means the efficiency will go up, i.e. Kevin Durant. But I'm not necessarily sure that Harden can be more efficient because playing off the ball, as we both mentioned, isn't really his strong suit. So back to sort of what I was getting at, do you have them below Minnesota now? I mean, do you have Minnesota leapfrogging them, or where do you sort of see the top 5 teams in the West right now?
Yeah, Warriors 1, Spurs 2. I think Minnesota is going to take some time to really gel. I think they won't finish in the top. They won't finish in the top 3. I could see them 4, realistically 5. But I think they can really start, if they can gel and they fit. Teague is a good fit. Butler's a good fit. Then I think they could really start to make a move towards the end of the season, and in the playoffs they can make some noise. Obviously, they won't take out the Warriors year 1, but I think they could really make some noise. So yeah, either 4 or 5 for them. I think the Rockets should slot in right around 4 or 5 also with them. Who am I missing at 3?
And then Oklahoma City is really the other one of the main 5.
Yeah, Oklahoma City. I could see. Yeah, they should get to 3. The Jazz will obviously fall out either into the late round or the bottom half of the playoff bracket in the West, missing it altogether. But yeah, OKC, I feel like they should make a big jump. Adding Paul George to that system, I feel like will be a much easier transition than CP3 to Harden.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think Golden State 1, I think San Antonio 2. I think it's sort of a toss-up between Oklahoma City and Houston at 3. I know a lot of people will think that's a little high for Oklahoma City, but I mean, you look at what Westbrook did. 48 wins. I believe it was 48 wins. 47 or 48 wins with not much of a secondary offensive threat, and they should take a jump with Paul George. I mean, he's a much better overall player on both ends of the floor than Victor Oladipo, and they don't really lose anything in Sabonis. And the puzzle might not be finished. I mean, if they can really go hard after a power forward and land Paul Millsap, or this just occurred to me right now, so don't get too crazy, viewers, because I have heard nothing. But if they can even get Serge Ibaka back on a team-friendly deal as an unrestricted free agent, you know, they can really do something, because that's probably really the only hole now is who to plug in at 4. Taj Gibson is a free agent, so that's still sort of cloudy. But if they can make any sort of improvement at the power forward position, I think they can be there at 3, with Houston at 4 and Minnesota at 5. But it's going to be a gauntlet going through the West next year, and you know, every night in that conference is going to be probably important for seeding.
For sure. I just think the most underrated part of that trade is how much the Rockets are truly losing in that. I mean, they lose their defensive anchor in Beverly, a bunch of bench pieces with Decker. I think it'll just, it's a lot to replace.
It is. And you hit it on the head, because Beverly, he's a guy people just hear his name and think, okay, pesky defender, sort of a nuisance. But he was so much more than that. I mean, he's really the heart and soul of the team and the vocal guy, because that's not James Harden's role. But not only was he a great defender, but he became a very reliable three-point shooter, which was very important in Houston. So, like you say, Chris Paul will really have to be impressive, and they'll really have to figure this out on the fly if they're going to make up for their losses, because they did suffer some depth issues. So that's one thing to remember, is that, yeah, they get the big name Chris Paul, but they do lose, you know, some bench pieces, and then a very reliable guy in Patrick Beverly. Another thing I'm seeing come across right now is the Golden State Warriors have a plan to target Rudy Gay if they do lose Andre Iguodala, and that is very interesting, because Rudy Gay still got a lot left in the tank. Obviously, he tore his Achilles and missed the second part of this year. But if you get Rudy Gay as your sixth man, even if you lose Andre Iguodala, I don't think that's much of a drop-off, if any drop-off at all.
Yeah, it's definitely higher upside straight offensively. They'll miss no beat at all with simply scoring with Rudy Gay. You will lose, obviously, some leadership, some defense. Andre Iguodala, in both finals wins, played great defense on LeBron for stretches. And I mean, KD now helps make that less of a focal point. And then lastly, just Iggy is then the heart and soul of this team, obviously with a finals MVP under his belt. So it'll be a tough loss, but yeah, if they're going to lose him, Rudy Gay is not a bad plan B whatsoever.
Yeah, not at all. Let's run through 3 more guys, 3 more of the bigger names that we haven't covered yet, and sort of talk about where we see them fitting in, and sort of try to wrap this up. So there's J.J. Redick, there's Drew Holiday, and one guy we did touch on, Paul Millsap. What are some fits that you see potentially starting with J.J. Redick?
76ers, Waj is reporting that he's meeting with the 76ers now. I think that is a must-sign for the 76ers, and I think it's a great fit for Redick. I think he can mentor those young kids almost, and help get them to the next level, teach them how to win, teach them how to be pros. And I think that's a good spot for him. They need shooters, and Redick can step in, maybe even start, if not play an important bench role and just be a spot-up shooter for them.
Yeah, I agree. I sort of had visions of him before this whole Paul George news broke, playing in Oklahoma City, who could really use an upgrade at wing shooters, especially with Andre Robertson. But I don't think that was feasible to begin with because Oklahoma City is very, very tight on money and can't really sign anyone outright other than using their mid-level exception. So anything like that would have had to been done through trade. So I like the 76ers fit. What about Drew Holiday? Where do you see that as being a fit? I know New Orleans is the front runner, probably the heavy favorite, because obviously he's familiar with them. And not only that, but I think the support they gave him while his wife was suffering from, I believe, a brain tumor at the beginning of last season. I think stuff like that goes a long way, and makes you really feel good about staying with that organization. Not to mention they can offer him the most money.
For sure, everything that you just touched on would be a huge factor in him staying. I eventually see him staying with the Pelicans. I don't think the market would be huge for him outside of New Orleans. So I just imagine him ending up there.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I think they definitely are the favorite, and I would not be surprised if he signs with them in short order. And then lastly, we've talked about Paul Millsap with the Thunder, but a couple other sort of fits I see. It's being reported that the Suns have high interest in him. They had high interest in Blake Griffin, but he's off the market now. And then, I've been sort of drumming this up for a while now, but there's been really no links that I can see being reported. But I think another potential fit is a sign and trade with Portland, because I think he would be a phenomenal fit with Nurkic, McCollum, and Damian Lillard. But it would have to be a sign and trade because Portland has no money. They're over the cap. They'd probably have to move the contracts of Myers Leonard, Al-Farouq Aminu, or Myers Leonard and Evan Turner. But I think that's potentially another great fit for Millsap. What do you think between sort of those three things, those three teams, the Thunder, the Suns, and the Blazers?
I think the best fit for him would be the Blazers. Being able to give the Blazers kind of a post presence, multi-dimensional guy down low, pair with Nurkic, kind of puts them in a level that they haven't been at. They've been really relying on their guards in the backcourt to carry them, but that would make them a real multifaceted team. And I think that would be the best fit. That might not be the most plausible fit for him due to all the events that would have to happen to cause him to go there. But yeah, it seems like the best fit for sure.
Yeah, no question. I think that's a legitimate big four. Damian Lillard, McCollum, Nurkic, and Millsap. Like you said, a lot of sort of pieces have to fit into place for that to happen. But that gives them a lot of balance, and like you said, they become a very multifaceted team if that happens. Well, John, I think we're going to wrap this up. By the time we get this up, and by the time a lot of viewers get to this in the morning, so many more trades and signings will probably have occurred by then. But people can check us out on RotoDen.com. We have the rolling updates of all free agency news from all outlets. So it's a great place to find all the news in sort of a one-stop shop rather than searching the different sites and looking at different Twitter accounts. You can just go to RotoDen.com, and on the front page you'll see the free agency rolling updates. So definitely check that, because like I said, there's going to be a lot more news and notes coming out by the time a lot of people get to this podcast. But John, did you have any final thoughts on free agency or anything you're looking forward to seeing before we go?
No, just excited to see what's in store.
Yeah, no question. Well, thank everybody for listening, and we will see you guys next time on a RotoDen NBA podcast.